I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an FDA regulator. I am a clinical trial specialist, inspired, grateful, maniacal, as in an obsessive enthusiast for clinical research. But I'm frustrated, and we know there are hard facts ahead of us. Over $2 billion and way too much time for drugs to come to market. 15,000 new compounds and devices in the pipeline, with 57 million open spots needed for all the clinical trials to be filled. Less than 5% of the population participates in research, and it's so inefficient as far as pharmaceutical spend, 20% attributed just to go for bringing patients to clinical trials. Why is drug development so challenging? The patient population knows so little about clinical trials. Healthcare generally is less engaged than we need the healthcare system to be engaged. Patients don't know how to get to trials. Pharmaceutical companies are cast as heartless, exploitative, clinical trial participants as guinea pigs. 5K runs and inspirational bracelets are fantastic, but we need people to actually participate in clinical trials. I didn't come here today to have a negative conversation, though. Rather, I came here to talk about how we might solve some problems together, how we might expand our view on clinical research as a care option. But first, I want to take you back a little bit to my journey. So I think like everybody in this group, my childhood dreams were to do good things. Be a doctor, be a teacher, be a mom, or be a backup singer to Karen Carpenter, for those of you going way back, but that's for another time. Being a clinical trial specialist was never on that list. Upon graduating from Texas A&M, a friend of a friend told me about this clinical research coordinator position. Other than having a friend in high school who had brain cancer and who was in a clinical trial, I knew nothing about clinical research. Absolutely nothing. So on day one on that job, and this was in 1986, I was assigned a blood pressure study. Now, I had no clinical training whatsoever. In fact, I had to call my mother, who's a nurse, and ask my mother to give me a tutorial over the phone on how to take a blood pressure. Seriously. Now, that first month on the job was so stressful. I was in so far over my head. But I have to say, in that first month, the takeaways for me were probably more significant than all the years of my career combined. And I want to share some of those takeaways with you today. First of all, research is a team sport. Doctors, patient volunteers, the whole clinical research trialist team coming together basically to address as best as possible the unmet needs of the patient volunteer while answering key questions for the pharmaceutical company, the questions posed. Number two, clinical research is a lever, an amazing lever, a catalyst for an active learning system. In my case, in the case of my first study, I learned so much about hypertension from the physicians I was working with, from my colleagues. I, in turn, was able to educate my patients that I was working with. Number three, research provides an incredible shared value opportunity. First, for the patients. The patients get a white glove care experience. We've heard a lot of people talk about that in this forum. Secondly, pharma gets the information that they need to make important development decisions. And if all goes well, then new drugs and treatments and solutions are brought to the people in need. Now, After I mastered blood pressure measurement, I then went on to move to North Carolina, and I joined what was a very small research clinic at that time, today known as PMG Research. And during my time with the company, amazing things happened. We were involved in over 7,500 different clinical trials and had a clinical trial conversation with over 150,000 people, resulting in tens of thousands of people actually participating in clinical trials. And it was magnificent. It was magnificent because it was always one patient at a time, one volunteer at a time. And as I look back over the 30 years and realize the advances that collectively we have made, childhood cancers, immunotherapies, vaccines, just to name a few, all would not have been possible without the priceless gift of trial participants participating in clinical research. But we can't stop on this. There's so much more to be done, and progress is going to take being more creative and more collaborative. And I want to give you an example of a couple of important, I think, movements. Number one, CISCRIP is a nonprofit organization very committed to just advancing the general public IQ about research. And my own Greater Gift, which is a nonprofit organization that serves as a mechanism to thank and celebrate clinical trial volunteers. To date, we have actually thanked volunteers and clinical trial heroes with gifting over 80,000 vaccines to children in need, a one-for-one match. But we also need technologies and new solutions coming forward. So a few years ago, as an example of collaboration, I brought together a group of physicians, clinical trial specialists, patient volunteers, and we sat down together. And what came from this meeting of a group coming together as one is that we realized that there was an opportunity to paint, possibly, an expanded view of clinical research. And so we decided that there was an opportunity, there was a hypothesis that we had that if we actually looked at patient experience and patient data coming from trials, not the pharma data, perhaps it would paint an expanded view for us. And that is exactly what happened. And what we found was, number one, clinical research actually serves as a lever for reduction of cost of care. In some cases, we saw 60 to 70% reduction of cost of care in diabetic patients, in high-risk cardiovascular patients. Number two, we saw improved outcomes for people participating in research. Again, we were not looking at therapeutic claims. We were looking at claims coming from the healthcare side. Decreased mortalities, reduction in readmission rates, to name a few. And then on top of that, I guess the cherry on top was the patient experience. We had an outside survey come in and the advisory board and survey patients. And what we heard was that actually 100% of the patients in a given trial reported that leaving the trial, they felt more engaged in their overall well-being. So good things for the patients, good things for the providers. A real quick story for you. A physician investigator who I've worked with for years, I saw him not long ago and I asked the question, just a general question, how's it going? He gave me the expected response from many physicians, and it's, medicine is hard. My patients are unhappy, reimbursements are getting difficult, I'm spending way too much time on the computer. But he said, the bright spot in my day, it's interacting with my research patients, because my research patients are always happy to see me. My research patients are getting the care that we all want as patients. So that is the promise, and that is the hope, and that is the legacy of Jerry. I think many of you here knew Jerry. Jerry was a fearless patient advocate. He was a self-described respectful fan of Medicine X. When I think of Jerry as that maniacal maverick for clinical trials. Jerry actually saw that there was an opportunity for all of us to be a part of improving healthcare. Thank you.